Folklore and mythology are often overlooked as source material for the weird. They're dismissed as noise quite a lot of the time. But I'm basically tonight, hopefully, going to look at the fact, well, this might be a little bit harsh. Quite often, the reason that folklore and mythology perpetuate, the reason that they're so long-lived, is because there's lots of grains of truth in them. And quite often, they're based very much on solid fact. And I'm hoping I can give you quite a good demonstration of why this might be. Okay, so done. May the fourth be with you. See, had to be done. The Force, Flying Saucers, and Folklore Reimagined. The prologue. I would do a Frankie Howard impression, but I'm rubbish at impressions, so I won't do any tonight. I will spare you. Let's go back to 1955. Our journey begins, as they all do, in a small, uneventful town in rural Kentucky. To the northwest of Hopkinsville is Louisville, where a very young Cassius Clay, then about 14 or so, was dazzling people in the ring with his amazing skill, even at that age, making a name. Within 10 years, he was the world heavyweight champion. To the southeast, just over the Tennessee border, which is round about just south of Clarksville, Sun Records was introducing the world to rock and roll, and Rock Around the Clock had just become a mega worldwide hit. And Elvis had just signed to RCA, so we were about to start hearing him. To the south, directly from Hopkinsville, was Clarksville. And apparently, if you take the last train to there, you can get some coffee-flavoured kisses and a little conversation. So it's always worth a visit. But it's actually next door to Fort Campbell, which is where the recruits used to ship out, mostly to, first of all, Korea at that time, and then later to Vietnam. So that's what the song's about. People go, oh, last train to Clarksville, isn't it lovely? No, it's a bloke about to go and get shot in Viet Cong. But anyway, I digress. However, Hopkinsville itself was very, very much unregarded. But it has had actually a massive cultural impact, though most people will never even realise this. On the evening of August 21st, just off the old Madison Road, about 8 miles north of the town, is the community of Kelly, and the home of Cecil Lucky Sutton and his family. Now, apparently, that night, he and his family had engaged in a several-hour battle with what can only be described as goblins. The first account in the local press appears to be that carried by the Kentucky New Era the following day, which stated that a spaceship carrying 12 to 15 little men had landed, had laid siege to the house, shots had been fired, the homeowners had fled, and by night time, a dozen police officers had attended, and military police from Fort Campbell, but none had seen anything. Now, this is very, very strange. What had happened, basically, early in the evening, is that one of the family had been out getting some water, literally, and they'd seen what seemed to be a silver craft hovering over the edge of the farmland that they owned. He'd gone in, quite excitedly spoken about it. They'd rushed out, nothing. They couldn't see anything. However, later in the evening, they started hearing noises on the roof. Now, they were in the Midwest. It was the summertime, so they thought raccoons, squirrels, something like that. And then they saw through the window what appeared to be a goblin looking through the window. Absolute shock. Then they noticed, they ran outside. They saw things on the roof. They ran back inside and started shooting through the walls, through the windows, you name it. Apparently, according to some accounts, they shot as many as 200 rounds out into the house, and this carried on for ages. Eventually, they fled. They got into a car. They drove to the sheriff's office, and that's when the police came out, and the police called the military police on the belief that they'd seen a flying saucer. This was the 1950s, height of the Cold War, very, very panicky. Well, and obviously this is a massive flap. It was all over the local press for ages, but it was actually quite contained. It made a couple of column entries on the 15th page of the New York Times, maybe, but that was about it, at the time, certainly. So locally, it did prompt some intense interest for a little while, and it would. But before very long, it all just kind of quietened down again. And the only real interest in it was people who were really interested in that kind of stuff, like us. And one of the people who was really heavily interested in this was a very young Steven Spielberg. And it was the Hopkinsville encounter that became Spielberg's inspiration for what he first called Watch the Skies. It's a very early title. It references The Thing from Another World, which was another great famous film and one of his great favorites. And he also initially called Close Encounters Watch the Skies. Later, he decided to call it Dark Skies because he thought it'd be better to make more of the menacing aspects of it. As it is quite a frightening encounter, really. Whatever it was, imagine being in the house in the dark, no street lights, no nothing like that. All of this happening, quite frightening. By the way, if you can hear banging, it's because they're basically completely renovating the house next door. And even though it's 7:15 at night, they're heathens and they carry on doing it. So don't worry, it's not a problem with your sound or mine. It's the people next door with a sledgehammer. God love them. They're nice neighbors, though. Anyway, back to Dark Skies, as Spielberg called it. He wrote several treatments on the idea. He really, really was keen to make it. But there was a great big problem, which was that the Suttons, the family about whom it actually was, who actually had the encounter, didn't want a movie made about them. Actually, they were quite shy and retiring. And in fact, this is one of the things that mitigates in their favor, the very fact that they really didn't want the publicity particularly. It's an intriguing case. And in fact, it'll be written up. I'm actually working on a thing about it for the FT, which should be out later this year, as it's nearly an anniversary for it. Anyway, so Spielberg and his collaborator, the production designer Ron Cobb, who later went on to make Alien, amongst other things, were forced to fictionalize the story as much as they possibly could, just to stay this side of a potential lawsuit. So it actually turned into 3 separate films, each exploring different aspects of the narrative. So the first, somewhat obviously, was Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which equated the wider world with J. Allen Hynek's grades of encounter, first kind, second, and third. And it was, of course, a runaway success. And on the back of this and his various other blockbusters, such as Jaws, next along came, well, the big one for Spielberg, certainly, E.T. and Gremlins, which most people don't think about, but Spielberg was the producer of it. Spielberg is as much responsible for it as Joe Dante. He just was unavailable to direct. Otherwise, it could have been a different film. To be honest, I think Dante doing it probably made it better, if anything. But it's very much inspired by Hopkinsville. And in fact, if you look at the narrative, it is the closest. The Gremlins themselves do bear a strong resemblance to the goblins as described by the Sutton family. And the whole thing, the home invasions, they go on the roof, they attack people, they do stuff, it's very definitely there. We all know what a phenomenal success in particular E.T. was, even to the point of when it was first released, there was a private showing in the White House with Ronald Reagan, no less. According to one account, and it's only one account, but it's been trying about a couple of people, following the screening, the president leaned over, he clapped Spielberg on the shoulder and quietly commented, there aren't 6 people in this room who know how true this really is. And unfortunately, there was a sudden press of people approaching Spielberg and the president, and it prevented Spielberg from pursuing the comment anymore. But subsequent to this, Spielberg has never commented. He's been asked loads and loads of times, but he just doesn't say. He's just, no, I'm not talking about that. But anyway, let's take the overall theme back a little bit. Okay. Myths. It might be useful to differentiate between myths and folklore purely on a semantic basis. So one rather neat definition I've seen tends to be that folklore is small scale. Folklore tends to be quite localized. It tends to be a tradition perpetuated more by word of mouth than anything else, and normally quite vague details, but a very, very strong central narrative. Indeed, urban legends, as they are today, and folklore are pretty much indistinguishable, except in terms of reach. Obviously, now there's a lot more media, and news travels an awful lot further than it used to. But in other respects, you look at most urban legends, details quite thin on the ground, but a very strong storyline. And that's what folklore tends to be like. Myths are similar, but usually considerably older and much more widely known. A handy analog would be belief systems. A relatively small number of adherents with a very specific and focused doctrine is normally defined as a cult. Whereas a very large number of adherents with a very specific and focused doctrine would be a religion, or at least a denomination thereof. Where this leaves Scientology and stuff, God alone knows. But anyway, clearly there's a lot of middle ground occupied by both. And this goes for both folklore and myths. Both tend to have very recurrent themes. So I'm focusing more on mythology here, as it tends to have a proportionally greater influence on popular culture. But it's not to ignore the fact that quite often mythology comes from quite a localized source, from folklore. So myths do have a definite archetype associated with them. Almost all contain three essential steps: departure, sometimes called separation, initiation, and return. I shall explain. The US academic Joseph Campbell expanded on this theme. The mythological narratives often share a very, very same basic structure. The similarities of these myths brought Campbell to write a book in which he described the structure of what he calls the monomyth. He wrote The Hero with a Thousand Faces, which has become quite a standard text for a great number of people, especially if you're interested in comparative religions, comparative mythologies. And there's a very, very simple, basic thing. And this comes from the foreword of the book and is often quoted. It's called The Hero's Adventure. And this is a direct quote from Campbell from the foreword. A hero ventures forth from the world of common day into a region of supernatural wonder. Fabulous forces are encountered. A decisive victory is won. The hero comes back from this mysterious adventure with the power to bestow boons on his fellow man. Boons, rewards, advantages. He's obsessed with boons. If you read the book, boons all the time. Anyway, if it sounds familiar at all to you, here's some examples. And let's go right the way back. Gilgamesh. Here he is. He's about to try and give his cat a tablet, as you can see. A number of us have been there. Gilgamesh and his former enemy Enkidu joined forces to journey into the wilderness to fight with the guardian Humbaba. I'm not making this up. Look it up, all right? And prevent him from destroying their sacred forest or sacred glade. Now, the gods are angered, the goddess Ishtar particularly, and they try to destroy Gilgamesh. But ultimately, he sacrifices himself to spare his people, and as a result, becomes a living god himself. Okay? So that's the very earliest legend of them all, or myth rather. Greek mythology. Greeks got tons of them, tons of heroic quests, often again resulting in personal loss or death of the protagonist. It's the noble death, but in doing so, then he saves his civilization, or he saves the people close to him, the people dear to him. And again, often involves mysterious mentors, mysterious gods looking after them, mysterious apports. They're given magical things with which to use. Very big on that, the Greeks. Beowulf. Beowulf. He slays Grendel. He becomes king of the tribe, and he sacrifices himself to save the tribe from the dragon. Arthur overcomes challenges and oppression to benefit his people. He dies. His sword is chucked into a lake for the next great king, and he himself apparently rests under Glastonbury Tor to come to our rescue. God knows we've needed him. Where the bloody hell is he? Moving on. Robin Hood, of high birth, becomes a wild man, fights for the good of the common people. He overcomes tyranny, has a magic bow. Luke Skywalker, to bring it up to date a little bit, although in true mythic style, of course, this is actually a galaxy far, far away and a long, long time ago. But he's an innocent farm boy who, you know the rest. He overcomes tyranny, magic, blah, 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 blah. And him, to bring it relatively up to date, an innocent lad who lives in a cupboard, and then he lives in a castle, and he overcomes tyranny, and he has a magic stick. I might be simplifying very, very slightly. You get the idea. The point is, they all conform to Campbell's template to a greater or lesser extent. And taken one by one, the hero rarely starts as a hero. So it's called The Hero's Adventure, and this is how Campbell puts it forward. Okay, so first of all, there's the call to adventure. So the call to adventure is the first sign that they have a calling, that something's going to happen, which means that they have greater things to achieve. So there's the hologram of Princess Leia when he chucks a screwdriver into R2-D2. The owls for Harry Potter, or the discovery of an artifact that leads to promised treasures, Indiana Jones. Quite a lot of mythic stuff in Indiana Jones as well. Again, it's the Spielberg-Lucas thing. They're very, very heavily into it. And in fact, Lucas has often said how much of an influence Joseph Campbell was on it. The mentor, usually older, usually white bearded, usually wise, bit gnomic, possesses great powers, but is modest with it. So you get Merlin and you get Obi-Wan Kenobi, you get Yoda, you get Qui-Gon Jinn. Henry Jones Sr., interesting use of his own father there. The separated father comes back and imparts wisdom to Indiana Jones. Gandalf, all of that kind of stuff. The guarded threshold. Mos Eisley in Star Wars. Platform 9 3/4. It's a magic way into the kingdom. It's the mysterious door in The Hobbit. You know, there's the one that they'd have to wait for the moon to come through a certain time. That's the only way it can open. That is the guarded threshold. Again, Tolkien really, really understood mythology, obviously, and he wanted to build a cogent mythology for the British Isles because there wasn't a great deal apart from Jack the Giant Killer, Gog Magog, and Arthur, obviously. But anyway, often as well with the guarded threshold, there comes an apport. So they're given something to help them. So it's the ring, it's the wand for Harry Potter, or it's a sword for Arthur, or it's a lightsaber for Luke Skywalker. And notice, by the way, when he gives him the lightsaber, just how economical Obi-Wan Kenobi, the great mentor, is with the truth. Hands it over to him, doesn't say to him, this was your father's sword. By the way, he murdered a load of children with it, but he'd want you to have it. Nor does he mention, by the way, that he was a great pilot, but that he, Obi-Wan Kenobi, cut off his arms and legs and left him to die in a volcano. Don't mention that bit. Don't know why. He should do, really. Anyway. Trial. The journey, preparing them for the ultimate challenge. So these are the sort of things they have to go through in order to get where they are. And quite often, they pick up people along the way. So the Fellowship of the Ring coalesces. Skywalker meets Han Solo and Chewie. All that kind of stuff. It's the people that they meet who will help them and enable them along the way, enable them to face their challenge. Okay. Then the challenge itself, the big thing, where they have to defeat the big bad. Don't have to tell you what it is. It's the likes of Voldemort. It's the likes of Sauron. It's the likes of Darth Vader. All that kind of stuff. They have to defeat them, and in so doing, they free everybody else. And basically, if you're Joseph Campbell, they come back with a boon for everyone else. This is important. There must always be a tangible benefit for others. It's not an heroic journey. If the only person who benefits from it is the person who takes on the challenge, that's not the mythic stuff. The mythic stuff has to be a general good for everyone. Everyone has to benefit from it. And it's an essential code for sort of social cohesion, which is another reason that these things are so long-lived. It shows people altruistic. It shows people doing things for others. And as such, our society, or any society, can't actually function unless people do cooperate, unless people do have that kind of consideration. So any narrative that reinforces this is actually quite necessary. So it's kind of hardwired into us. And again, this is something that Campbell basically insists on, that it's an archetype that's hardwired into our brains, which is why we respond to it. We almost get a dopamine hit, If you remember the very first time, I'll give you Star Wars again, the very first time that the Death Star blows up, the very first time you see that, yeah, brilliant, because it's a triumph and it is, it's an up, it's a high, it's good. And as a result, story threads such as this are incredibly durable. And I'll give you some examples. Hubris, right? Hubris is very, very important, okay? Hubris being human arrogance. Okay, so a lot of these things are Greek principles because they're the first ones to codify them, but they've appeared all the way through. The Greeks were all over this. So as you can see there, Icarus, flying high, didn't listen to warnings, had the arrogance, I can beat the gods, I can be like the gods, I can fly, you're not supposed to. Wallop, he dies. And they're quite simplistic in that respect, they're beautifully rendered. And more pervasive still than hubris, for our purposes, is Prometheus. Stole fire from the gods, was punished by being condemned to have his liver torn out every single day by an eagle, every day for eternity. The P.G. Woodhouse made a joke out of it later. It's quite funny if you ever look it up. However, the idea that man should not possess godly powers, such as the ability to give life, shows up a lot. And as we all know, the first modern-ish rendering of this was, yes, Frankenstein, which was subtitled The Modern Prometheus. Man creates an animate being in his own image that then eventually destroys him. And this also crops up with things like the Golem of Prague. It's the same sort of thing. And then we see it later in later iterations to bring it to modern popular culture. This is still a very, very, very strong archetype. For example, the Terminator is a man-made intelligence which decides we're the threat it's meant to protect us from. Westworld, from the story by Michael Crichton, beings designed for our hedonistic pleasure decide that they have a right to be respected in a very big way. And the biggest of them all, Michael Crichton again, following on from his own particular theme, Jurassic Park. Yet all of which neatly encapsulate the point that man must question his motives and accept that maybe there's boundaries for reasons other than technological. As Malcolm says in Jurassic Park, we never stop to think if we should. You know, yeah, we can do all this stuff. Should we be doing it? And it's important that we keep thinking this. And that's another reason that this is so thick. And in fact, right now, looking at the debate about ChatGPT, it's very much there. That's incredibly Promethean. And we need to think about it, us as well as the people who are actually in charge of it. A variation, however, is man's attempts to defy nature or defy God. Bear in mind, certainly in the old days, nature and God were the same thing. They were basically seen as one central kind of intelligence, albeit spread over a polytheistic tableau. For example, in The Tempest, the world's most powerful sorcerer, Prospero, controls everything up to and including the weather in his own small environment on a desert island. But in the end, it's nature in the form of Ariel the spirit and Caliban the wild man who actually inherit the island on which he lives. Nature eventually wins. He doesn't win. He gets what he needs. He gets reconciled with his son and he gets his dukedom back and things like that. But it's at the expense of his power. He is basically nature in the end is benevolent towards him, but he's out of there. It's nature's island and he was never going to own it. And a neat interpretation of this later was Forbidden Planet. Morbius, the super intelligent scientist, as played by Walter Pidgeon, and his daughter live on an isolated world, but they're threatened by an invisible monster which comes from the outside and threatens to attack them every single night. And it actually turns out to be the disembodied amplification of Morbius's own id. Very Freudian. And see the discussion on Tulpas last week. This is exactly the sort of thing. In effect, the monster is a Tulpa which is trying to stop him from doing what he's doing. It can see, his own id can see the danger effectively, and it just wants to restore balance and harmony. As 1950s sci-fi flicks go, it actually stands up incredibly well. And it's very, very difficult, however, seeing his later career to see Leslie Nielsen playing straight. You keep on just expecting him to straight face going, that's not important right now, or something along those lines. But it is well worth it. If you've never seen Forbidden Planet or haven't seen it for a long time, do so. It's extremely good, with a nice bit of Disney animation in the middle of it as well. Another very, very important Greek basis, which has followed us right the way through, and I'll explain why, is Thanatos, or death, the law to which all mortals are always subject, and is often partnered in mythology with Eros, of course, or love. Death is also a frequent component of the hero's journey. Orpheus descends into the underworld to rescue Eurydice. Heracles did the same. Heracles went underground, went to the underworld, not knowing at that point that he was actually part immortal and therefore wouldn't die. He was willing to give up his life. And this is a very common theme, again, identified by Campbell, is the frequent need for the hero to die or get as close to death as possible, selflessly, and then to resurrect, as the underworld holds secrets, and the hero can only understand these by sacrificing themselves. Again, Harry Potter, he and Dumbledore, if you remember, actually do go into the underworld, and they're carried across the river by Sharon and stuff like that. And he has to drink from the fountain of death, not fountain of youth. Just as shamanic practice can involve deliberate poisoning in order to approach death and learn its secrets, that's pretty much where that came from. Say what you want about Rowling, but she knows her mythology. And again, if you look at the modern blockbusters, this concept is rife. Kenobi allows himself to be struck down to further mentor Skywalker. Strike me down, I should become more powerful. And you think Vader would know this, but, you know, anyway. E.T. dies. E.T. then comes back to life. It's also been pointed out many times that E.T. is found in a stable, can heal people by touch, can allow people to levitate and can walk on water. But I mean, I think that's pushing it a little bit, to be honest. Harry Potter himself dies in the Deathly Hallows and then reanimates in order to defeat Voldemort. However, death itself in the form of Thanatos deserves a class of its own, and I shall explain why. Anyone whom Thanatos touches must die. We've already established that. And the concept of trying and failing to cheat death has remained constant. So in Chaucer's The Pardoner's Tale, three thieves attempt to evade death, and they can't do it. Whichever way they try, it doesn't happen. Death will always see through their tricks. This was then updated pretty much verbatim, but with modern dialogue, as The Treasure of the Sierra Madre, which you've ever seen. It is basically The Pardoner's Tale. And it's three thieves, except they themselves are trying to trick each other in order to get all the treasure. And each of them obviously loses their lives in trying to do so. And then Rowling, again, did so with the Deathly Hallows. That's exactly the story of the Deathly Hallows, is The Pardoner's Tale, just updated a little bit. However, Thanatos has also been in our culture front and center for 60 years, but we don't even notice it. And this is an important point I'm going to come back to. Quite often these things are right in front of us and we just don't see them. So Thanatos, death, has been around for a long, long time. Bond, James Bond. There's a tremendous book by John Higgs called Love and Let Die, which is a terrific examination of the disproportionate influence that both the Beatles and James Bond have had over British culture. And one of the most perceptive observations about 007 is that he is Thanatos. He is death, whilst the Beatles were love. And a remarkable coincidence, this is absolutely true, is that the opening of the very first James Bond film, Dr. No, in the autumn of 1962, coincided with the release of the very first Beatles song, Love Me Do. And literally it went on sale in Carnaby Street, several hundred yards from Leicester Square Odeon, where Dr. No premiered. So in the same time, they both took off. And in terms of culture, in terms of mass culture, they've had two of the greatest influences on our culture going forward. Nobody could have predicted the effect both would have back then. And Bond remains, at the time of writing, the single highest grossing film series featuring a single central character and thoroughly pervades our cultural landscape. However, he is, if you look at him, James Bond, to all intents and purposes, he is death, literally. He is allowed, sanctioned, ordered to bestow death on others. It is destiny to kill people. Yet every woman he touches dies. Everybody who has meaning to him dies, apart from those who enable him, though even at the end of Skyfall, M gets it. Spoiler alert, the inevitable conclusion is reached in No Time to Die, the most recent one. If you haven't seen it, I apologise, but it has been out for 18 months. So he himself, Bond, becomes quite literally lethal to anyone who touches him. And as a result, he has to save both his newly found romantic love and his long-lost child by sacrificing himself. And so in true hero fashion, James Bond actually does die. He sacrifices himself. And yet, at the very end, we see James Bond will return. The hero will come back. By the way, as I said at the time of writing, Bond is the most successful single character franchise, but one is poised to overtake him. If anybody's got any guess, well, if you don't, it's actually Spider-Man. Spider-Man, the Spider-Man films, they are just about poised to overtake Bond in terms of box office sheer oomph. And guess when Spider-Man debuted on the newsstands? It was the autumn of 1962, exactly the same time as Over the Road. Yeah, strange old world, isn't it? Okay, so we've looked a bit at Spielberg and we've looked a bit at Lucas, but there's another who follows mythology quite closely, and it's been doing it in plain sight for a long time. And that is Shyamalan. Now, obviously, we all know about The Sixth Sense. It's a child with mysterious powers and a mysterious mentor who comes forward. Unbreakable, a man who cheats death and has a mysterious mentor. The Happening, in which nature gets seriously peed off with human beings and starts killing us off via pollen. I know all about this, as I have really, really bad hay fever at the moment. So if this is rambling at all, please blame the antihistamines and not my poor preparedness. Then there's The Village, which is medieval woods with monsters lurking. And rather neatly and rather circularly, back to Hopkinsville. One of the most recent obvious analogues is Shyamalan's Signs, It's a family under siege in an isolated Midwest farmhouse. There's creatures on the roof, climbing through the windows, their purpose beyond scaring Mel Gibson and, well, it's got to be said, prompting a really neat variation on the tinfoil hat. And I love it. I've actually got one of those. I don't think I need it, but it just looks neat. And actually, it turns out that these things are harmed by water. So what they're doing on Earth, whoops, whoa, go back. What they're doing on Earth isn't explored overly much. Hopkinsville itself, remains a staple of ufological lore, our own folklore. It's relatively niche, but the story it tells is full on mythology now. Most people, to draw some sort of conclusion, whilst we might somewhat resent the distorting and exaggerating effects folklore and myth has on putatively true and fascinating accounts of inexplicable fantastic events, we might want to think of it this way, okay? So in their seminal 1931 tome, 1066 and all that, which if you've never read it is a hoot, it's well worth reading and it hasn't aged at all badly. Seller and Yateman made the entirely accurate observation, and this is one that's worth remembering in any field of investigation. History is not what you thought. History is what you can remember. All other history defeats itself. On this basis, maybe we need to reframe our attitude generally to mythology and modern folklore and urban legends. Given the stark choice, which hopefully we'll never now need to make, would we rather the story, or at least its very essence, be known and perpetuated, or would we rather the pure and original be left to wither on a high shelf until all memory of it's gone, which if nobody's looking at it, is what's going to happen? Ask most people today if they've ever heard of Hopkinsville. They'll look blankly at you. Shrug, what? No, never heard of it. But if you ask them if they've seen E.T. or Signs or Gremlins, and they're going to nod and go, yeah, I've seen that. And you can say, aha, you know a lot more than you think. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for putting up my insane rambling. Given the date, may the 4th be with you all. Blessed Beltane, and the end. Thank you very much indeed.
Oh, thank you, Stuart. What a wonderful talk. Well done. Getting some little rounds of applause there. That was really good, entertaining, funny, and honestly, my brain is absolutely dazzled by some of those facts. Got lots of action down here in the chat, which is always a sign of people being really involved and really getting into it. Let's see. Are you okay to take some questions?
Of course I am. Yeah, absolutely.
Perfect. Okay. So Christian Lander, Captain Kirk asks, what is this May the 4th all about? I think we know the answer to that one.
He knows.
Okay, yeah, let's have a look. So Aisling, who is one of our Uncanny community, and she's a big fan of the Astonishing Legends podcast, which is an excellent podcast. She said she was just listening to the Astonishing Legend episode on Hopkinsville, and she said she didn't like how they just opened fire on the aliens. No, they did, but they were frightened people, and it's kind of, I know that there's been very, very little interviews with the people themselves. I said they actually shunned publicity. I'll go a bit deeper into it, as I said, the thing I'm writing at the moment, but they did. They were terrified, and the sheriff who interviewed them when he turned up at the sheriff's office said these were country people. They were used to critters. They were used to wandering around the woods at night. They hunted and stuff like that. They weren't frightened much, but they were terrified. And another thing that sometimes comes up, people say, "Oh, well, it's moonshine country." They were temperate. It was a temperate house. They didn't drink. And there were children there. As soon as you mentioned it, the first thing that came through my head was moonshine.
Yeah. No, they didn't. Oh, they did drink, but it was a dry house. They did the mother would not let them drink in the house. So they're all hardworking farming men. They were, and there were children in the house as well. The children sure as hell weren't drunk, and they were terrified too.
So that was a very visceral and raw, immediate reaction, wasn't it? To whatever they saw. They must have been out of their minds with fear.
Absolutely terrified, yeah. And the police took it seriously enough for a dozen cops to turn up, on a Saturday night. Yeah.
I do hear what you're saying though, Aisling. I mean, you like me are probably visualizing 200 ETs sitting on the roof looking all cute and cuddly, and that does seem a bit horrible to open fire on them.
Imagine 200 gremlins.
Yeah. That's more understandable, I think. Ruth, I have to say this is absolutely hilarious, and I haven't met your mum, and if I ever do, I don't know if I'm going to be able to keep a straight face. But Ruth says, a young child once told my mum that she looked just like E.T. My mum was not impressed. I like I said to you in the comments, Ruth, kids are vicious. They really are brutal.
I'd just like to make the point that Tony Hayes, no, I don't think it does run in the family. Thank you very much.
Absolutely doesn't. She's gorgeous in real life. I have the pleasure of knowing her in real life, and it doesn't run. I'm sure it's not true for your mum either. Like I say, kids are
just... no, of course it isn't, no.
Yeah, and then Aisling goes on to say, I had nightmares after watching Gremlins, but it was a very specific dream, not related to the movie. That sounds like a good time for you to come in, Aisling. Do you want to tell us more about that? She may or may not be. Oh, hello.
Can you hear me? It was really weird. It was like I had this like kind of, my sister had an upstairs bedroom. So my bedroom had her stairs as a wardrobe, and you could walk on that, but there was the last few steps was closed off. And I always dreamt that the gremlins were on that last wee bit that was closed off. But instead of like when they got soaked with water, their tongue fell out and it split and it made two gremlins. And it totally freaked me out.
Ooh.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, it was like totally like no, I couldn't watch it for years after that. Like, it was just a nightmare that I had about that wee tiny box in the staircase.
Yeah, so thanks, Stu, for making Aisling's childhood nightmares come screaming back.
For a lot of people have said that about Gremlins. I think the thing about Gremlins, which a lot of people, it is very similar to things like, it's the reason people find things like Communion frightening, is because it's actually in your house. You know, it's not something that's external. It's something that's within it's an invader in your house that you couldn't stop coming in, and that is quite a terrifying thing for people. You know, and it's domesticity upset by something like that, and it is a frightening thing. I made the mistake of reading Communion actually on a plane, believe it or not, at night, and I was the only one awake in the cabin. Oh God, I freaked myself out. I couldn't. It was ridiculous.
Did you press the call bell just so the stewardess could give you a cuddle?
Yeah, didn't work. I had some scotch instead.
Yeah, but what you're saying about home invasion too being sort of involved. What I'm rereading at the moment, something I did in A level, was In Cold Blood.
Oh yeah,
Capote, about the horrible murders of a whole family in Kansas in 1959, and the fear of being isolated, and the way that whole community, they were all happy to leave their doors unlocked until that happened, and then nobody could look at each other or trust each other in the town, despite knowing each other all their lives, just because of one incident.
Huge, wasn't it? It was really. I mean, that's a brilliant book as well. Capote is quite underrated in a way as a writer. He can really evoke that stuff, can't he? He's amazing.
Absolutely. Christian Lander. Hi, Christian. Do you want to unmute? Are you still there? Hopefully he's here. Okay, no, he might have disappeared now.
I was trying to find myself on the list so I can unmute myself.
I don't know why I thought you would normally have a black background. That's why I couldn't find you in the blue.
Well, I went with Scooby-Doo.
Very good. Did you want to talk about Dark Skies, the late 19 TVs?
Oh, so actually, it was just a comment. But you mentioned Dark Skies, and then you flowed straight into Steven Spielberg, and of course, I just made the comment that so Dark Skies was a late 1990s show, very X-Files-esque, with obviously a gentleman and his wife, obviously on the run, and they were involved in Project Blue Book, I think it was, and they had seen aliens, but it kind of had a very X-Files-esque show. When that show was cancelled after the second season, it was Steven Spielberg that actually renewed the show under the moniker of Taken, and that effectively formed the what would have been a season 3 or 4 had Dark Skies continued. And as such, had the same lead character, same kind of principle, although it is distant somewhat. But if you listen to the commentary, it mentions that it is in fact a sequel show, but was given Spielberg obviously loved the concept of Dark Skies and wanted to see it conclude. But yeah, that's Taken. Actually, it's still I've seen as right there with the X-Files in terms of a show that obviously hit at a certain time when the paranormal, the science fiction community were just kind of like utterly absorbed by the amount of content coming out of TV production. It was amazing.
It was kind of the sweet spot as well as before it started getting saturated. wasn't it? So the stuff that's made was good quality. And in fact, we've come back that way again. I think, the really poor quality has kind of tailed off to a big degree, kind of burned itself out. So, I mean, people slag off Stranger Things. I actually really like Stranger Things. I think it's smart, it's well made. And I think, because it's got enough self-knowledge, hasn't it? And I think Dark Skies and indeed, Taken had a degree of self-knowledge as well, didn't it? It was kind of there. It didn't take it too far. It didn't jump the shark, which is Spielberg's influence. He knows exactly how far he can take stuff.
Absolutely, I totally agree with that. I was just saying the Gremlins also, it's an interesting show, a film, because it's sort of, I can remember being at that time, being able to watch it. I didn't go to the cinema to watch it. I was a bit too young for that. However, everyone had a gizmo. Every kid who was my age had gizmo. So I was sort of seeing this kind of like childhood moniker that everyone had. And every child, teenager, young person saw Gremlins.
Yeah.
And of course, it was an 18.
It was, yeah, well, 15 at the very least, yeah, it was. And I was old enough to watch it because I'm that old. But it's but the bit that always gets me is a bit of cinema, because when I used to teach 17-year-olds, taking a whole bunch of them to go to a cinema, it was very similar to that. And the number of times I wanted to go behind the screen and blow up the cinema was, you wouldn't believe it. It's very, very reminiscent indeed. But yeah, it did. But the whole thing is very much again based on what happened at Hopkinsville, and it's all there. It's just people have forgotten Hopkinsville and they remember Gremlins instead. It's mythology, mate.
Thank you, Christian. Dave Sibier. Hi, Dave. Dave, you're welcome to unmute yourself. I'm just looking at your comments here. I've heard that there are 3 accounts of the Kelly Hopkinsville encounter, and only one of them has aliens. It's also supposed to be similar to another folkloric trope, the night siege.
Yeah.
Dave, are you there? Sometimes his mic works, sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah, I'm here.
Hello, Dave. Good evening. Did you want to speak to Stu at all?
Yeah, I did. It's just something that this is just something that I've heard. Unfortunately, it was a comment years ago in Magonia, which takes the view that the ufology really is, or the UFO phenomenon really is, a modern myth of things seen in the sky, based on earlier folklore.
Yeah, no, that's true. The alternative, of course, belief is that actually mythology is based on UFOs. It's kind of which direction.
Yeah.
That's the other thing, isn't it? It's like, funny enough, talking about tulpas last week. It was Ivan Sanderson, I think, who actually suggested that UFOs are tulpas or creatures in the sky. And it's all very circular, isn't it? Perhaps it's all part of one massive continuum. For my own thing, I've always been totally opposed to blanket explanations for anything. I think individual occurrences, by all means, find an explanation, but you can't then apply that explanation to absolutely everything else that's similar. It's I think they're the enemy is blanket explanations. I think it's a lazy way, but unfortunately, it's the way that science tends to work sometimes, isn't it?
Yeah. One of the more esoteric explanations I've come across for UFOs was in the magical press, the New Age magical press. And there was a piece asking whether UFO recipients are really magicians and that they're conjuring UFOs out of nowhere. And this got a lot of ridicule from certain quarters, but I think it's actually a reasonable question.
Yeah. It might be in some cases. Again, it's the blanket thing, isn't it? In some cases, it might be. It's like who was it? Was it Terence McKenna? Said if you go into a shopping centre, everybody you recognise might be a ghost, for all you know. You don't know them. They might all be dead. You have no idea. But he also went on to say that they might be 50 different types of ghosts. That one might be a phantom. That one might be a crisis apparition. That one might be something else. They might all be ghosts, but of 100 different, 50 different varieties, 50 different circumstances, and trying to explain them all with one thing is never going to work. But first of all, you have to define what they are. Yeah. I know it's fascinating stuff, but you can drive yourself mad after a while, can't you, David?
You can, and scare yourself silly with some of the encounters.
Absolutely, I'll try not to do it after 8 o'clock at night.
Yeah, like there is no one size fits all for most things in that field. I think that's applicable.
Yeah.
And Dave, you were also saying about the Polish linguist Roman Jakobson, also analysed and sketched out the form and element of folk tales in the structure of the folktale.
Yeah, I got the title wrong. I think it's the morphology of the folktale. And it's Roman Jakobson applying, I think it's structuralist linguistic theory.
Yeah.
To the way folktales I don't think he's been terribly influential. He's cited, but I think most people would probably find it a bit, a bit dry, because I managed to find a copy in a university library, and it's more or less written in logical notation, or a lot of it is. So that there are all these symbols saying goes on to such and such, such and such.
I think it's the standard definition of a textbook, isn't it? It's any volume which costs 50 quid and from which you extract one quote. That's basically what a textbook is. Nobody's supposed to read the bloody things, God no. So it's probably much the same as that, isn't it? There's an awful but again, I made the allusion to stuff withering on a high shelf. How many things are hidden by simple dint that nobody reads them? They could be written so some of them are so not gluttonously written, I guess, that they're pretty much unreadable. They might have the best stories on the planet, but if nobody reads them, who knows?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dave.
Thank you.
Good evening, Kieran. Hi, Kieran Farrell. Kieran says, what about Len Dayton's Harry Palmer in Funeral in Berlin, or the Ipcress file? What's that in relation to, Kieran?
Well, it's really sort of the other way round. It's almost like the point that Dave Sevier made about Dune, which I agree with, which is, Harry Palmer, kind of criminal past, is forced to go straight because he was bailed out of detention barracks, and therefore becomes a reluctant hero by dint of having nothing special about him, except he can see around him some of the other people and what they're trying to do. And in that sense, his only sort of special effect in that way are his trademark spectacles. So what do you reckon of that, Stu?
No, I completely go along with that. There's somebody, I'm trying to remember who it was, did a thing ages and ages ago in The Observer where they compared Bond, Palmer and Smiley. And they said they're the extremes, because obviously Bond is the gadgets and or at least in the films, not so much in the books, but in the films, he's the gadgets and the swank and he's the glamour and all that kind of stuff. Palmer is the middleman. He's kind of, he gets himself into exotic conditions sometimes, but he's basically an ordinary man. As you said, he's a clever ordinary man. And then Smiley is the other end, which is real espionage, which Le Carre knew, which, as he said, is sitting in a car park for 3 days waiting for nothing to happen. And that's what real espionage is generally like. And he said, you're dead right. But I think Palmer's the one who actually does the journey. Bond's already there. Bond starts there, he's already the hero sort of thing. But you're right, Palmer goes through it, doesn't he? And did you see the ITV adaptation a few months ago of the Ipcress file? Don't know if you saw it. It was tremendous. They actually took it back to source and they did it properly. So it's not over an hour and a half. It's really properly done. Really good. Wow. I fully recommend it. It's ITVX, I think, still.
Oh, thanks. I'll give that a watch. One of the things that always gripped me about the Ipcress file was the kind of the whole psychological business side to it, and the torture that Harry Palmer was put through, and the way that he was a hero in not only withstanding the torture, but being able to sort of con his torturers that they'd finished him when actually they hadn't, and he makes his escape in only, and he then realizes who was responsible, and he then exposes the traitor in a real kind of modern Western showdown, if I can put it that way. Very cinematic.
It is. It's very the way they do it in the TV. I won't spoilerize it, but it's the same. It's the same narrative, but it's done in a completely different way, and it actually works. Even though you know the story and stuff like that, you still go bloody hell. You know what I mean? It's that good when a story, even though it's a story and it still surprises you when something happens. That's a very well made pitch, and I fully recommend it. Fully recommend it. It's great. But good point. Harry Palmer. Dead right. Yeah, he's on there.
Thank you, Kieran. Then we also have Dave the Fave. Hello, my love. Dave Field from the Uncanny community. I like this little comment. Lol, Obi-Wan was a git. You're definitely going to have to expand on that for the non-Star Wars people among us. And let me see what else he says. Christian is debating whether to watch Star Wars this evening. But now might go, based on your wonderful talk, I imagine, with Battlestar Galactica or Star Trek. Yeah. and-
Battlestar Galactica's a bit underrated. I think, especially the remake. The remake was very well done. The 70s has dated quite badly, I think, but it still has its charm. But the modern rendering of it's actually very, very good. And again, it's it's got a big twist at the end, but I won't go into it. But it does work, and it's a journey. And I think Battlestar Galactica has a great deal of the original Trek about it. And in fact, which Voyager also had in Deep Space Nine, what they had in common was the fact that they're isolated. And again, we come back to the home invasion thing. They're isolated. With a lot of the more modern Star Treks, you get the idea they can be home in 20 minutes if they really want to be. So there's no real jeopardy. With the original Star Trek, it's 5 years, they're miles from anywhere and anyone else. So they have to rely on themselves. And the same happens with Deep Space Nine, same happens with Voyager. And Battlestar Galactica, even though they're a collection of ships, they're on their own. And it's how they manage. Somebody compared it once to the Exodus, which was pushing it a little bit, but who knows?
I think there's a lot of people that you've inspired to either watch for the first time or rewatch Forbidden Planet as well. And
So,
they're just
do not miss it.
Do not. It's a very good film.
It is. It's one of the very first to show us flying saucer as well. It was around about that time. There was that, and the day the Earth stood still. They're the first ones to show classic flying saucers. Because it's not that long after Adamski and what's his face with the thingies in the distance. So the antihistamines are starting to take over now. Got to apologise. So yeah, it actually shows a flight, but it's piloted by humans. It's a human flying saucer. But interesting. I didn't mention the day the Earth stood still, basically because I thought I could wax lyrical about that all day. But that is interesting because again, it's very much about. The Deus Ex Machina, it's the God coming down to impose on human beings who have gone too far, and it teaches humans a lesson, and that's another trope which is shown occasionally. But Robert Wise directed, and Robert Wise has the most eclectic CV of any director ever. He directed that, West Side Story, The Haunting, which is the best ever haunted house film ever, 1963. For anybody who hasn't seen that, watch that one; it will terrify you. Because it's so subtly done. And he also directed this. Sorry?
Who's in that one? Who's in The Haunting?
That one, Robert Wise. It's directed by Robert Wise, and it stars. Oh God, who stars in it? I'm trying to bloody remember now. It's not a very, very highly well-known cast.
Okay.
But it's nice. It's in black and white. And I tell you what's terrifying about it. It's because you see nothing. Everything implied.
So Richard Johnson.
Richard Johnson.
Yeah.
Yes, it is. And it is absolutely terrifying, isn't it, Kieran? Because it is so atmospheric, and that's it.
Yes,
brilliant.
It's good because you see the interaction of the thing or the things on the characters. So it's a bit like the original, the thing from outer space, because you see the interaction between the characters and the way that they kind of fall apart and dispute amongst themselves. And that adds to the whole atmosphere of suspense.
Yeah, it's fabulous. They remade it in 1999, didn't they? Jan van Bont remade it as the Haunting, but they showed everything. And as a result, it lost all of the suspense, it lost all of the terror because you could see it. In the original, the 1960, it's in black and white, you see nothing. And as a result, that's terrifying. It's M.R. James overjoyed to it.
That one's definitely going on the list. Thank you so much. I know that you're struggling with your hay fever, so I will draw it to a close in the moment. There's just a couple more points I wanted to make. Jackie Tonks, good evening, Jackie. She said the alien accounts, obviously from Hopkinsville, reminds me of a close matching story of a young posse of adolescent Bigfoot attacking a house.
Yeah, that's happened a couple of times. Somebody mentioned Ape Canyon, didn't they? In the it might have been Jackie actually in the chat thing. Yeah, there's a really good podcast about it not long ago. In fact, I think it's Paul Bestel's a few weeks ago about Ape Canyon, and it's
they're very similar scenarios, aren't they? People
and then there was the chat
fighting things off. Yeah,
and then there's Hanobia, wasn't it? Hanobia is the more recent one. That was Oklahoma or something, isn't it? And that's a family was literally attacked, and allegedly the military was sent in to deal with it. But I mean, that's a bit of a common trope with Bigfoot things at the moment, or has been, is that there's military involvement somewhere along the line. But I don't know, that's possibly spinning off a bit. But but no, you're right. The home invasion again. It's and was it the Chapman family in British Columbia, wasn't it? the family that had to leave because of Bigfoot was just terrorizing them effectively in the house.
Yeah, all very similar stories. Yeah, yeah. And there's the film Something in the Woods, a Bigfoot film, which is almost following that sort of line with them leaving in the end. But yeah, that's a good Bigfoot film actually. Yeah.
Fabulous. Thank you, Jackie. Lots more thanks and praise coming in for you there, Stu. It was an excellent talk. Dave Sevier and Paula are mentioning about Crowley opening a portal potentially as a result for UFOs as a result of the Babylon working.
Yeah.
So forgive my ignorance. We're talking about Aleister Crowley here?
Yeah.
Hello, who's that?
Hello, it's
Oh,
Paula.
hi, Paula. Hello, Paula.
Hi. Yeah, he did the Babylon work. Right, I need to get my dates in. I can't remember. I don't remember the dates. But he did the Babylon working with Marjorie Cameron. No, I'm talking rubbish. That was Jack Parsons, the Babylon working, not Aleister Crowley. I do beg your pardon. It's one of those days. He did the workings with Marjorie Cameron, and it was supposedly said that he'd opened up a portal and the flying saucers came through. So it would have been sort of late 40s. And Dave also picked up the Aleister Crowley channeled Lamb, which is pretty much your archetypal grey. It's quite so similar in the picture. But yeah, sorry, it wasn't Crowley, it was Jack Parsons. I apologise.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, that's brilliant, Paula. The hauntings of Russ Tamblyn. Okay, yeah. Everyone's saying thank you. There must be a Bigfoot movie list. Well, yeah, like I say, you've added quite a few movies and films to things that we have or haven't seen before. The best
Bigfoot film of recent years was called Exists. Exists is tremendous, and that's another one. That's another kind of home very, but this time it's people in their environment, and it's Bigfoot being defensive and protecting itself, and it's very good, and that was very tense and well worth watching too. Fabulous. Thank you so much, Stu, and thank you to everyone that's come along this evening. Thank you especially to Caroline as well for coming to help me out. She's not feeling very well this evening, and she's come along to record the webinar because I am technically just basically a Luddite and couldn't work out how to record it. Wasn't sure if my right-hand man, Christian Lander, was going to be there to help me, but luckily we have this recorded, so it will be appearing on the ASAP YouTube channel soon, so you can all catch up with it. Thank you all for coming. We had a great crowd tonight. Again, apologies from CJ. That's why you're looking at CJ but listening to me, because he's got no internet. We'd rather look at you and listen to you, Claire. You do know that, don't you? Oh, that's really sweet. Thank you. Take me an hour to say that. I know it did. We practiced that, Stu. Jesus. I wrote it down. Yeah, we will see you all next week for Neil Nixon's talk. In the meantime, please keep interacting on the Facebook page. Drop us a line if you need anything from ASAP anytime. We'll be happy to answer your questions or queries. Get your conference tickets booked, and we shall see you next week. Thank you and good evening. Thank you. All right, bye. Take care.